Good evening. Good evening. It's Tuesday, August 10th, 2021. This is a regular meeting of the Policy and Services Committee. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Yes. Committee Member Tanaka.
Yes, here.
Committee Member Stone.
Here.
Chair Koo.
Here, thank you.
We have a quorum.
Okay. So before we go on, we have a change of agenda items. We're going to switch them around. So we'll have the Office of the City Auditor presentation of the asset capitalization audit activity first, and then we will review and discuss the proposed amendments to the tree protection ordinance. So I would like to see if there's any public comments.
There are no public comments at this
No
time.
public comments. Okay, very good. So we'll come and bring it back to the committee for a vote. Ms. Milton, will you take the vote?
Absolutely. Committee Member Tanaka. Oh, you're muted, but I think you said yes. Okay. Committee Member Stone.
Sorry, what are we voting on?
We're voting
I'm sorry.
to take item 2 before item 1. So
Okay. Sorry.
reorder the agenda.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. And Chair Koo.
Yes,
Motion passes unanimously.
very good. So now we will go ahead and take oral communications from the members of the public on any item that is not on the agenda. Madam Clerk.
There are no requests to speak.
Going once, going twice. Okay. We're going to close oral communications and go to action items, which is the first one, Office of the City Auditor, presentation of the Asset Capitalization Audit Activity Report. Mr. O'Rourke, it's all yours.
Good evening, Ms. Koo and members of the Policy and Services Committee. It's a pleasure to be before you. I hope you enjoyed your month off. I'm presenting today on the first of many audits on our audit program. That is the Asset Capitalization Review, Construction in Progress. Today we'll be covering those results and we'll walk through some recommendations that we've posed. Our agenda, so we'll go through the project background. This kind of goes back to the project objectives and some of the scope, how we completed this review. We'll talk about the audit itself and sort of the approval process. We'll have time for questions at the end, but certainly would take them throughout. And I think it's important before we even dive into this that we wanted to thank the City Auditor's Office, wanted to thank the efforts of the Administrative Services Department, Ms. Noze and her team. We began this audit in roughly April, which is a really tough time for her department, and she stuck with it, and her team did as well and did a really great job. And this was our first audit activity. So lots of questions about process. So really wanted to thank her department, as well as the city manager's office. We asked for audit responses when Mr. Shikata was out of town. So kind of tough timing for some of this, and they did a wonderful job working with us and were honest and candid throughout the process. So we really appreciated their efforts. So some project background, these objectives are the same objectives that we reported in our audit plan, as well as the task order that was approved. But ultimately, if you recall, there was a $12.6 million adjustment last year in the financial statements, the FY20 financial statements. And there were a lot of questions in the committee meeting surrounding that adjustment. So we really wanted to identify the root cause of that adjustment. That's our first objective. And then number 2, really determine whether or not there were adequate controls in place and whether or not they were operating effectively surrounding the asset capitalization process. So on the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see some of the steps that we take, really fundamental basic audit steps, information gathering. So we looked at sort of the construction in progress, that's what CIP stands for in this circumstance, worksheets, the adopted capital budgets, and we also conducted some process interviews with some of the accountants. We then went into the analysis phase where we interviewed some additional key personnel about system capabilities, that being SAP, how the system was configured, and how construction in progress, or rather projects, are set up in SAP. And lastly, we reviewed those controls that are in place and identified some opportunities for improvement in order to make recommendations, which is what we'll cover here today. So ultimately, there was the $12.6 million adjustment that was made in the construction in progress accounts in FY20. And essentially, those costs were improperly capitalized or recorded as capitalizable costs when they should have been expensed in the corresponding years. And we determined that that was as a result of an incomplete execution of a key internal control. Really on this slide, I'll dive deeper into kind of the root cause and some of the recommendations here. But on this slide, as you can see at the bottom, there was sort of a growth in a certain construction in progress account from 2015 to 2020. And ultimately, the issue at hand here was sort of self-identified by Ms. Nose and her team. They looked at these figures and determined that there was growth, and there likely shouldn't have been. Those accounts, simplistically speaking, should have remained relatively constant and not grown, as you can see at the bottom. And so they identified the issue and ultimately, put in place some improved processes to rectify this moving forward. And we, as audit, wanted to come in and be the independent objective party to ensure that those controls were in place, so they're operating effectively, and what could be done to potentially prevent something like this in the future. You can see a sort of a summary here. Those fixed asset accounts to which these costs were recorded were across many projects. Some examples are listed here. And really, I want to point out that this was identified by Ms. Nose and her team prior to that correction in last year's financial statements. In our report, which you have in the packet tonight, there are ultimately 4 observations and some corresponding recommendations. Our first observation is that when costs are incurred on a on a project, let's say, they're all recorded as capital costs. There's not currently a mechanism to segregate capitalizable costs from expenses. Ultimately, that requires some manual intervention and manual review, which really gets at observations 2 and 3. But observation 1 here is that they all are recorded to one account. And ultimately, what we would recommend is that the Administrative Services Department explore opportunities to leverage technology, that being the SAP system, to segregate costs in the future. And we are recommending that this be done as part of phase 2 of the SAP upgrade process, which will be taking place over the next fiscal year and potentially beyond. So perfect time to kind of explore whether or not the system can be configured in such a way that can accomplish segregation of costs to prevent this issue in the future. Observation number 2, so those costs, they're all currently settling to a capital cost account, should be reviewed more frequently. And ultimately, what we're recommending here is that the Administrative Service Department and the accountants associated with this process review those expenses and remove them from the capital cost accounts so that they're not improperly recorded over time. So essentially, this is just a improved internal control, and we recommend that that be done more frequently. So previously, that was an annual exercise, and we're recommending that that be done at multiple points throughout the year. And then lastly, you can see there's some policies associated with this, one for the general fund and internal service funds, as well as one for the enterprise fixed asset accounts. And essentially what we're recommending here is that it's been a bit of time since those policies were reviewed, and we recommend taking another look at them. Something that you might see a recommendation on being done every 2 to 3 years, and it's been beyond that at this point. So taking a look at policies and ultimately enhancing the components of those policies that deal with the issue at hand here, that being how costs are capitalized. I will say that as part of our process, we present these observations and recommendations to the Administrative Services Department as well as to the City Manager's office. And we've done that leading up. So that's, they've already had a chance to look at our observations. And essentially we ask for concurrence or hope for concurrence on our observations. And for all of the observations in our report, we have indeed received concurrence from Ms. Nose and her team, as well as Mr. Shikata. And they have also developed plans to remediate these matters moving forward. So those plans you can see within the report itself and the associated timelines. And essentially, we plan, or rather, they plan to have these remediated within the next year. So what are our next steps here? Number one, tonight we're asking for this to be approved by Policy and Services Committee and ultimately remitted to City Council for review and approval. We will then, City Auditor's Office that is, present this to City Council. Ultimately, we don't consider a report final until we've received Council's acceptance or approval of the report. So you probably do see a draft watermark on the report as is. So we will bring that, if approved tonight, to a meeting, a subsequent meeting, likely in September, to City Council. And then after that, of course, these, there's observations, opportunities for improvement, and corrective action plans that have been developed. And it's our role as the City Auditor's Office to periodically review activities to ensure that those corrective actions have indeed been implemented. So for example, the periodic review of the capitalizable costs, what we'll do over the next year is use a couple of those periods, sort of sample select, and ensure that the process and internal controls are operating effectively moving forward. And thus, providing some level of assurance that this won't happen again in the future. So this concludes my presentation. I think, of course, I want to take questions and just have discussion around this audit itself. But I also am curious if you all want to comment today on sort of the level to which I've reported to you verbally versus what's in writing. And if you have any thoughts or recommendations to improve our process in the future, I'd certainly love to hear that as well.
Does any other staff want to add anything to what Mr. O'Rourke has said? I see no unmute, so I'll go to the general public. Ms. Milton, if there's anybody who's raised their hand to speak.
If you'd like to speak on this item, please use the raise your hand function and we'll call your name to unmute. Chair Koo, I don't see any requests to speak.
Okay, thank you so much. In that case, we'll go to council members here. Does anybody have any questions, or also to answer Mr. O'Rourke's question about how he might improve, if there's any need for improvement of his presentations? Everybody's so shy. Okay.
I mean,
Mr. Sung.
I don't have any. I don't have any questions. I did appreciate. I thought the written report was thorough and clear, and I appreciate the concise oral report that you just gave. I think well done. I think definitely all your reports have been very clear and helpful, but I really appreciated just how concise you were today, and was very helpful. So thank you.
Councilmember Tanaka.
Yeah, so thank you, O'Rourke, for your work on this. Really appreciate it. I think I thought it also was very thorough, and I like what you did here. So great work. I guess let me kind of move into things that I thought maybe might be helpful for us in the future. So I first of all, I think it's actually kind of tricky to know what's, I think the layperson, it's hard to know what do you capitalize and what do you expense, although it has a humongous deal in terms of your finances, and it's an easy way to hide money and hide expenses and whatnot. So it's good that we caught it and didn't really have that much of an adverse effect on us. I guess the thing that I was thinking about is, and it's kind of neat how staff caught this themselves, because they were wondering, how come this keep going up, right? So I think it's good that staff caught this, but it makes me wonder, because there are probably other things that, maybe shouldn't be going up or shouldn't be going down or should be staying the same, but aren't. And so I think, like, when I look at my own company's finances, or I look at, the budget for the city, the thing that I try to do is I try to think about is what is anomalous, right? So what is unusual, right? So it's unusual for this account to be growing. And so that's how come it was caught. And I think that's maybe a good maybe North Star that we could use when we look at our budgets, right? To see if, because it's a very complicated budget. We have a ton of funds and lots of different accounts and money moving back and forth. So it's difficult for someone just to, make sense of it. And so I guess I'm just looking at the city auditor in terms of, can we put some of those things in place? Can we, especially since you guys audit other cities, right? Is there a way for us to, like benchmark ourselves? We know like what normally goes up, what normally goes down. And also, to be honest, I think when budget season comes up, it's almost really nice to actually see deltas, like something versus baseline. So like, for instance, last night, we said we're going to raise the rates, but in the presentation, at least the 4 slides we got, there was no baseline of, well, what is it compared to other cities? Now, it may be buried, 3 links into a report, right? But that's not really making it publicly accessible, right? It makes it very difficult for people to kind of suss out the truth. So I think what would be really useful, especially for finance stuff, is to have this idea of a baseline. So when we look at something, it's also against something else, right? It's against last year, it's against comparable cities. It's like for this account, like maybe there are accounts that we know that should stay the same within a certain range, or should be, exactly the same. But I don't know if city auditor, you can talk a little bit about that idea and see if there's a way for us to implement, or at least do a sample, right? So we don't have to do it for everything, every line item in the budget, but to do some sort of sample where we can maybe find other issues, right? And now 12 million is actually a fairly significant amount of money. And so, and it seems like it went on for a few years before it was actually found, right? So can you talk a bit about what you've, if something like this possible to implement? And better yet, it would actually be great if we could get like a delta report or anomaly report for the budget. Like what is it, what's anomalous about this versus like previous years? What's anomalous against for this versus other cities? Can you speak on that a little bit?
I can absolutely speak to that. And if any folks from the Administrative Service Department want to chime in for what they might do, I think that might be helpful for this question. From my perspective, I think interestingly, we are roughly, I'm going to say 4 to 6 weeks away from kicking off our next round of the risk assessment. And, this is sort of an annual activity. This year we're doing it, and, it's only really 7-8 months removed from our prior risk assessment. So we want to kind of dive into some different activities. And I think, Mr. Tanaka, potentially to address part of your question, what we can do, and I think what would be good for us to do, would be to conduct some of this trend analysis, look at revenue expense categories, and determine whether or not there are any trends that sort of stand out, whether there's anything anomalous. So absolutely, I think that would be a good exercise for us to do as a city auditor's office as part of our risk assessment exercise. In terms of benchmarking, I think, my general thought is yes, we can, but what should we benchmark ultimately is the question. And I think for the city auditor's office, I think if we, in the risk assessment process, identify any anomalies, I think it would be useful for us to go out and benchmark and determine, whether or not other comparable entities have experienced similar growth, loss, whatever the case is. And that might help explain whether or not it's an anomalous occurrence or not, or whether or not it's something we should dive deeper into. So I think there's a part of this that can be done during the risk assessment process, and we can absolutely do that and include that in the next iteration of our report. In terms of analysis or benchmarking, I can't speak to what might be done by the Administrative Services Department, whether that be comparing to other organizations or whether or not they conduct trend analysis on a more frequent basis. But I don't know if anybody has anything to add to that, or Mr. Tanaka, if you have any further questions
I do,
about
yeah.
what we might be able to do.
Yeah, I just think, and that's kind of the idea of, like, especially with numbers, right? It's hard to know, is it good or bad? And the only way you know is with a baseline. But so often we're given reports without a baseline. And so it's kind of like we have to make a judgment call, this is good or this is bad, but we don't have a reference point. And so I think this is why it's really, really critical to have baselines, preferably external baselines, not just internal baselines. Because if you just say, well, last year was $1 and this year is $1, it could be amazingly cheap and we're getting an awesome deal, or it could be amazingly expensive and we're getting a bad deal. We just don't know, because there's no baseline to it. And so I think it makes it difficult for the public as well as council members to really understand how we're doing when there's not this kind of way to compare, right? And I realize that staff is busy, everyone's busy. We had reduction in forest and all this kind of stuff, right? So I totally get all of that. But it's also, we're entrusted with the public's money and we want to make sure that it's spent wisely, right? And so that's why I think these having comparable numbers, even if it's not ideal, right? So like last night we looked at, there were of the cities on the list, right? We picked Menlo Park, which doesn't happen to be used in the same sewer plan, but why not pick cities that are most similar to ours, right? And why not have that table in the staff report? Why put it 3 links into the report where you have to, literally, I counted the links, so probably about 50 links in that report. So we have to, play needle in the haystack type of thing, right? And it just doesn't really, make it accessible to the public, very transparent. And I think we could do better. So that's why I'm thinking that we should, wherever possible, make the baselines comparable, right? So it's very easy for someone to understand that, oh, Los Altos gets half the wastewater rates versus Palo Alto. Okay, very clear, easy to understand. Or that Mountain View is getting, about the same. Or, Stanford is about this, or East Palo Alto is this, right? It makes it very easy for the layperson to understand. When we bury it in the report, it makes it difficult. People think we're hiding the ball, and which I don't think we are, right? I don't think we're trying to, but we want to make it easy. This should be the thing, front of the first page. Here's your number, here's what it is in the city next to you, right? Very simple, right? There's no debate, no like, okay, so where is it? Oh no, it's in the report, but you got to click 4 links before you find it. It shouldn't be like that, right? It should be really there. First page, first thing, it's the headline, right? It shouldn't be in the footer, right? Or one of the 50 footers you have to click through, right? So anyways, I just feel like we could do better than what we're getting right now.
Hi, good evening. Christine Peros, Assistant Director, Administrative Services. Thank you so much for your comments, Councilmember Tanaka. One thing we do with the annual audit is an analog review, and I see considering this type of adjustment in prior years annual report that will be done by staff and with a bit more rigor. Speaking to our annual report, there is also a management discussion and analysis, like on the front of the annual of our annual audited financials, which really does, highlight some of the variances you might see year to year. So hopefully that helps in the future, and hopefully, this year we're proactive about this review as recommended by Mr. O'Rourke and his team.
I appreciate. I think that is continuous improvement, right? We don't have to like boil the ocean day one. But I think, and I've given this feedback ever since I've been on council, right? But I know staff doesn't necessarily like hearing it, but I think comparables, making it easy for people to understand, putting the most relevant information up in front. I think I say that all the time, but it may be harder to do. But I just think it makes it easier for the public to understand and follow along. I don't know if you guys are on next door, but there was a next door discussion about the wastewater rates from last night, right? And people said, oh, Councilmember Tanaka's question was never answered, right? So there's this whole chain on there, right? So there's this kind of thing going on now, right? Unnecessarily, right? So why not just be upfront and transparent about it, right? Maybe we have high rates. Maybe there's a good reason for it. Okay, just say it, right? Put it out there. We don't need to put the numbers, 3 links in. We're not send us the slides or send the public the slides that have their comparables, right? Why do I have to ask? That should be the first thing out there.
Councilmember, I think I do need to comment and I appreciate your perspective. At the same time, again, as you and other council members are aware, I do think it's important for the public's awareness that we recognize that the wastewater rates, as an example, that were presented to the city council last night, really actually relatively late in the budget cycle, was the conclusion of a multi-month process which involved extensive review by the finance committee in addition to the full council. So as we talk about the and again, I think you've been pretty explicit in your criticisms of the way that information is presented, that last night's report is a snapshot at the end of a long movie. So really would want to be fair in terms of the criticisms you are pointing out, and recognize from a council's perspective that you've had the benefit of both directly as well as indirectly through your colleagues on the council to have that information, to have very in-depth discussions of the issues, and really recognize that that action last night was at the end of a very exhaustive process. That said, to your point, you've been very consistent in these arguments. Again, for the public's awareness, I do think it's really important that the record be clear, that that type of benchmarking information is a part of the council's decision-making process as a part of the budget each year.
Well, I have to disagree with you. I think that this is the headline. I think knowing what the rates we're paying versus our neighboring cities should be in the report that we're talking about. It shouldn't be buried into sub-reports. I realize that the finance committee may have reviewed it, but the finance committee decision is not final. The council decision is what's final. And so when you're making relevant decisions, I think that it should be something that the council should have the full information. It should be readily available and not buried in the reports. So I respectfully disagree with what you said.
If I could bring us back to the agenda, which is about the audit. But if I see Ms. Stump had her hand raised.
You beat me to it, Chair Koo. I was just going to encourage the committee to focus on that agenda item.
I realize Mr. Tanaka's points, but we have to focus on this agenda item. And so if you have other questions pertaining to this or comments pertaining to this agenda item, please continue.
Yeah, I guess, I don't know if the city could talk, because you guys do this for other cities. I mean, what other ideas along this kind of thread do you have that might help bring more transparency to what we're doing?
Are you speaking to asset capitalization or more generally to
more generally?
sort of
So this is one mistake that was caught, right? But there might be others. So I guess I'm just looking for what are some other best practices. I think one advantage of having a city auditor that does a lot of different cities, you see lots of different practices, right? So I don't know if you have other ideas or suggestions.
So council members and Chair Koo, I wonder whether this, which is a perfectly legitimate topic, if agendized properly, really needs to go into a larger topic item, maybe where the auditor has a chance to reflect and prepare for a kind of global assessment, and the public would be aware then that topic would be discussed, because this item is really agendized for a report on a specific set of tasks and a published audit.
Right. And actually, I appreciate that, Ms. Stump. I think also if we're going to discuss this, it should be agendized, and Mr. O'Rourke can prepare for it. And also it can be noticed to the general public. And they may also want to contribute into the comments and give suggestions or ideas, or even provide more questioning. If that is something of interest to you, Ms. Councilmember Tanaka, let me know, and we will work with staff in order to do something about that.
Sure, that's great. I think this is, I think a well-run city is also important. So if you could do that, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Sure. Is that it, Mr. Councilmember Tanaka?
That's it. Thank you. And
Okay.
It sounds like we're not allowed to talk about more, so that's okay.
Right. Well, thank you. It is about the asset capitalization review and their construction in progress. So I think just to give my comment, I appreciate your request to see if the presentation was sufficient. And I think that it was. Your report was very thorough, so we can read all of that and get to understand that if we had any further questions. But your presentation also answered a lot of the questions. So I don't have anything to add, and I think that this is a great way to continue to present and to provide your reports. And with that, I would love to entertain a motion. If someone wants to make the motion to recommend to council. If not, please, Councilmember Stone.
Yeah, I'll make the motion to move the audit to city council.
I'll second it.
Thank you. And with that, Madam Clerk, if you'll take roll at the vote.
Committee Member Tanaka,
Yes.
Committee Member Stone,
Yes.
Chair Ku,
Yes,
Motion
thank you.
unanimously.
Thank you. And I'm getting emails from the general public. It seems like that we may have an issue with the link for some of the oh, I see that we have increased. And the clerk has already fixed this, so we can continue to our second item now.
Brad?
Well, thank you and good evening, Chair Ku and committee. Brad Eggleston, Director of Public Works. We're here tonight to discuss proposed amendments to Title 8 of the Palo Alto Municipal Code, which we also call our Tree Protection Ordinance. And with me tonight is Acting Urban Forester Peter Gollinger. He's been in that role for close to 3 months now, since the time that Walter Passmore moved on from the department. He'll be giving the presentation. We've also have Planning Manager Jody Gerhart available here to help answer your questions. Next slide, please. Oh, wait, we're still trying to get the slideshow up. So just a moment.
Brad, I can do the screen share.
Okay, if you could do that. Thank you, Chantal.
No problem. All right, this is you, right?
Yes, so next slide. Thank you, Chantal. So why do we want to make updates to the tree protection ordinance? The main reason is that there have been a number of changes since the last time the ordinance was updated in 2001. And at the simplest level, the references to positions and city departments are outdated and simply don't reflect the current organizational structure. But more importantly, our urban forest master plan was adopted in 2015, and it set new goals that we want our ordinance to support and to help implement. And then some of those goals have also been included in the comprehensive plan and in the sustainability and climate action plan since that time. Then that bottom bullet, there's also new legislation on landscaping and on wildland fire prevention that impacts what we wanted to do in the ordinance. Water efficient landscape ordinance in particular requires updates to both the ordinance and another document that we call the tree technical manual that we use to help us guide the implementation of a lot of things that are in the ordinance itself. So before we move on to the bulk of the presentation, I did want to acknowledge that this process has taken a long time to move forward with a Planning and Transportation Commission review that occurred on the draft updates almost 3 years ago. We were paused for quite a bit of time waiting for completion of some consultant work that we needed to do that update of the tree technical manual. And then the project hasn't been a top priority for the last roughly year and a half while we've been dealing with the pandemic since last year. But with that intro, I will turn it over to Peter for the presentation.
Good evening, and thank you for having us today. So Brad mentioned the Urban Forest Master Plan, and some major items in the Urban Forest Master Plan are reliant upon updates to Title VIII. So some of these are to achieve a greater percentage of native and drought tolerant species, to ensure no net loss of benefits, to increase habitat, health, and social benefits, to strive for no net loss, increase of canopy cover, and to minimize the negative effect of urban forest from development. So all of these are currently not directly supported by the existing Title VIII. We have some things in place for no net loss of canopy, but it doesn't apply to all situations. So this is one of the reasons why we need to update Title VIII. Next slide, please. So Brad did mention that there are updates to the list of authorized officers throughout. The position of urban forester wasn't in existence the last time Title VIII was updated. There's also changes throughout for the tree technical manual. Due to changes in law for the Model Water Efficiency Landscape Ordinance that was passed by the state, we are changing the tree technical manual to the tree and landscape technical manual. This was the document that Brad was referring to that has been in process. It is now probably 97% complete, and it's only waiting on the final decisions regarding Title VIII to be completed and then sent to the city manager for approval. There's also many sustainability related updates that will support carbon credit protocols for future projects. The current version of Title VIII doesn't have any provision to protect those trees. The protocols require that those trees be protected to ensure that those carbon credits are kept. Next slide, please. So those are some of the basic changes that were made. However, upon review, we still think that there's some items that require further study and some additional input. Next slide, please. So one of the big topics is expansion of protected trees. So the current draft expands protected trees by including all locally native Palo Alto species as listed in the Urban Forest Master Plan. And it also includes increasing protected trees to include any trees over 36 inches in diameter at breast height. So some of the things that we want to consider is that list of native species from the Urban Forest Master Plan too large? There's also details for exemptions based on invasive species and high water use trees. Should those exemptions be itemized in Title VIII, or currently in the current draft, it's referencing external lists maintained by other organizations? Should we consider lowering the threshold size from the 36-inch that's in the current draft? This would not only simplify regulations, but it would increase the number of protected trees, which is ultimately what we're striving for, is to increase the urban forest. Next slide, please. So this is the list of locally native trees that is included in the Urban Forest Master Plan. The three green trees at the top are the trees that are currently protected under our existing Title VIII. Those are Coast Live Oak, Valley Oak, and Coast Redwood. The remaining trees are other trees that are locally native to Palo Alto. The blue trees at the bottom, including the red, are riparian species and are traditionally high water users. However, only white alder is listed on the high water use for the water use landscape classification of species. So that is the list that's referenced in the current draft as exemptions. So white alder would not be included in the list of protected species. Next slide, please. One of the other issues that we see still needing more work is 8420 to 8440 talks about public tree permits. Now, public tree permits are permits that residents can apply for and receive to perform work on publicly owned trees. So situations where this might apply are a street tree that has been maintained by the city for health and safety. The resident may want additional pruning for beautification. And if that doesn't impact the health of the tree, we would approve that. The language that's included in the existing ordinance and the proposed draft doesn't really clarify how that process works. It's a little jumbled, so we would recommend that we study that a little further and maybe reorganize that. Next slide, please. Thank you. So appeals. Currently, there is no appeal process for the removal of protected trees in the absence of development, no formal appeal process. There is for protected tree removals during a development project. There is a mechanism for that, but there currently isn't one for protected tree removals in the absence of development. So one of the things that we would suggest is that we simplify that by having the appeal process be the same regardless of how the tree was being removed. However, that's not in the current draft. Next slide, please. So prohibited acts. There's a lot of changes in the proposed draft that we submitted. However, we still think there might be some work to do. There is a potential loophole still. It was partially addressed with the proposed updates regarding protected tree removal in advance of an application for development. So this would be a situation where a protected tree was applied for removal with no development in progress or application submitted. The reason for removal was justified in the ordinance. Let's say, for example, the tree was affecting the foundation of a garage. So it would have been approved. However, 6 or 8 months later, the property applies for a development permit in which the entire structure was going to be removed. So if that had been applied for, if the tree removal permit had been applied for as part of the development, we could have possibly worked around those conditions and allowed for the tree to remain. Some possibilities would be to expand fees for protected tree removals, or possibly institute a development moratorium when protected trees are removed in the absence of development. So there's some language in current Title VIII and in the draft that talks about how to ensure no net loss of canopy in the event of a dead or hazardous tree being removed. And it has language that says, let me read it exactly. The drip line area of the removed tree or an equivalent area on site shall be preserved from development of any structure. So the difficulty with this is very hard to enforce or track. So we would recommend studying that a little bit further and perhaps consider other alternatives such as required replanting for all protected tree removals. Next slide. Brad, were you going to address this?
Certainly. Thanks, Peter. So this is kind of on to the additional work that we're looking at recommending, which is really focused on some more engagement and analysis. So there has been some engagement and discussion with community members while the current draft was being developed about 3 years ago. But as we're stating here, we do think that we need a wider opportunity for the general public to provide feedback than what has occurred so far. And then also, given that the Architectural Review Board is the place where development applications and their impacts on trees are considered as part of impacts and conditions of approval, we would also recommend that there be a review of the draft ordinance by the ARB. One other area that I'm very interested in looking at closely before we finalize this is just our staff impacts of making what could be a fairly dramatic impact of the number of protected trees. So of course, when there's an application for a project that has an impact on a protected tree, there's a lot more staff work that goes into that. Thus far, we've kind of done a little back of the envelope analysis, looking at the species composition of street trees and extrapolating that as if that was the composition on private property. But we'd like to go back and do kind of a sampling back for a while of actual applications we've received and see how many trees there are there that would have been protected under what we might propose in the updated ordinance. So next slide. So what we're recommending for next steps, in terms of next steps, we do think there's still a fair amount of work to do before we have an ordinance update that's actually ready for approval. One thing I wanted to note, this ordinance update was originally initiated at the staff level. And we do recommend getting council direction before conducting the additional community engagement, really given just the magnitude of some of the potential changes that we've ended up including in the ordinance, and especially in terms of ones that are significant, that expansion of protected tree species. Did want to note, we are very appreciative of the work the ad hoc group of community members did, who submitted some proposed additional changes to the draft ordinance. That was just Friday or last weekend. So we haven't had a chance to fully digest those proposed changes. We'd like to have the time to meet with them, make sure we fully understand those proposals. So those things we've shown here as things to do in September. Then we're showing October through December, doing additional outreach and engagement beyond what's been done so far to reach other stakeholders such as architects, homeowners who would be impacted by the ordinance, and having a study with the ARB, as I mentioned. We would then return to policy and services with an updated ordinance draft that would include any changes based on the input we've received and the engagement. And with the committee's recommendation, take that to City Council for approval by next April. And then last piece, Peter mentioned that tree and landscape technical manual. I think I heard 97% complete. So we would also concurrently complete the remaining minor updates that are needed in that manual so that it could be approved by the city manager and essentially become effective at the same time as the updated ordinance provisions. So next slide, but I think that is our final slide. So thank you. And with that, we'll turn it back to the chair. One last thing I was just noting, we typically have a slide that shows the staff recommendation. So let me just quickly review that from the report, what we're asking from the committee. Your review and initial input to staff on the draft updated ordinance is essentially one piece. And then the other is that you make a recommendation that, as I said, that City Council direct staff to conduct additional interdepartmental coordination and community engagement, make appropriate revisions to the draft ordinance, and then return to Policy and Services Committee with that. So thank you, and that's the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Eggleston and Mr. Gollinger, and welcome, Mr. Gollinger, and thank you for stepping in so quickly after Mr. Passmore's retirement. I think we'll go to the public for any questions and comments.
If you'd like to make a public comment, please raise your hand and we'll call your name and you can speak for up to 3 minutes. The first speaker we have will be Dave Armstrong. You can unmute and speak on the item.
Good evening. I'm Dave Armstrong. I represent Canopy. I'm on the board. Canopy believes that updating Palo Alto's tree protection ordinance is a top priority for the city. As we all know, trees sequester carbon, combat the urban heat island effect, prevent soil erosion, stormwater runoff, and many other benefits. Canopy has consulted with the ad hoc group that has prepared a red line draft of the suggested revisions. Canopy would like to see the city improve Title 8 by expanding the list of protected species in Section 8.10.020. The current ordinance protects only 3 species, as has been discussed, and that we believe that needs to be expanded. Canopy believes in protecting more trees during development under Section 8.10.050. Project applicants should be required to consider feasible alternatives that would avoid removing protected trees. And Canopy believes that we should simplify and enhance the requirement to replace trees. When a protected tree is lost for any reason, whether on public or private property, there is a loss of, for all of the community, of environmental benefits that the tree had afforded, as well as creating a decrease in the city's canopy. So Canopy supports staff's proposed changes in Section 8.10.050, which require tree replacement under all scenarios of property development. So again, thank you for devoting your time to this important issue.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Jeff Greenfield, you can unmute and speak on the item.
Thank you. Before I start speaking, I'd like to ask it, before my time starts, I'd like to ask if it be possible for Winter Dellenbach to speak after me in sequence with Doria and Karen. The 4 of us are part of the ad hoc that made the submission, and we have a coordinated discussion. So if you could accommodate that, that'd be awesome. Thank you.
So Mr. Greenfield, it was Mr. Greenfield, then Winter Dallenbach, then Karen Holman.
No, then Doria, then Karen, and it looks correct now. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, council members and staff. Jeff Greenfield, Vice Chair of the Parks and Rec Commission, speaking as an individual and on behalf of an ad hoc group, including 3 others who will speak after me. We appreciate this opportunity to discuss the Title 8 tree ordinance, which hasn't been updated in 20 years. Over the past few months, our group has carefully reviewed this code, and we submitted a comprehensive update recommendation to you last week for consideration. We've been working closely with our community's, quote, urban forest brain trust, including Dave Doctor and Walter Passmore, recent staff with an unparalleled understanding of the intricacies of managing and caring for our community forest. Also, Holly Pearson and Catherine Martineau, leaders at Canopy, are a valued urban forest partner. Our goal is to sustain and grow our urban canopy. Our approach includes improving clarity by adding purpose statements, reducing ambiguity by adding details on the tree removal permit process, and addressing gaps like adding references to the city urban forester. We must be sensible in our approach. One recommendation that decreases some protections is striking proposed changes where future development could be completely blocked in the drip line area of a protected tree removed in the absence of the development. Another key recommendation regards protections for both native species and large trees. Special protection for 20+ local natives at 11.5 inches diameter is an appealing option. However, as policy, this would be very complex for residents to understand and for staff to enforce. We believe it will be more effective to include special protection for a few natives and, consistent with neighboring communities, protect most trees at 18 inches diameter or even less. Our recommendation already addresses most of the issues in the staff report suggested that they suggest for studying further. Something not in our proposal that the staff report identifies and that the acting urban forester just mentioned is adding a common sense development moratorium to address a current loophole after a protected tree is removed in the absence of development. An email was submitted today with 2 errata from our original submission, including a fix to 8.10.20E, clarifying excessive pruning of tree roots for species other than oak should be defined as 25% instead of 15%. Also a typo fix in section 8.10.50B, changing R1 to R2. The email also notes support for minor staff report changes to sections 8.450A1, 8.10.10, and 8.10.40B. We support all these minor updates and don't worry about the numbers for clarity. They're all included in the V2 recommendation included in today's email. To further support our community trees, we also encourage a formal arrangement for the Parks and Rec Commission to serve as a forum for community urban forestry issues and advise council on related matters. This is an initiative that stalled out in the pandemic that we hope you'll endorse. In closing, I'll share wise advice I recently received. The best ordinance reflects community values. We believe this summarizes our intent and the details that we present to you this evening for consideration. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Winter Dellenbach, you may now unmute and speak on the item.
Hello, Policy and Service. I will make a few brief points. About removal of protected trees in 8.10.050. We made recommendations of significant changes to sections A through E of the ordinance draft update to ensure wording supports rather than weakens the tree protections added elsewhere in the tree ordinance by both staff and our ad hoc group. We think this is a particular critical part of this draft ordinance 8.10.050. Also, on your packet page 7, staff suggests a possible modification to 8.10.050B in the draft ordinance to change wording from development on a single family lot to development of a single family use. Consideration for removal of protected trees should remain based on zoning, not on a particular use allowed within the zoning. Changing to use would allow more tree removals. We recommend leaving this as it is and not changing it to use. Regarding tree replacement in 10.050, we agree with staff, packet page 6, quote, no net loss of canopy is one of the most important policy statements in the urban forest master plan, unquote. That no net loss is now proposed by staff for this ordinance is truly significant and indicates staff is serious about saving more trees, which is needed to sequester more and more carbon and cool our suburban heat island. This commitment to no net loss of canopy furthers the urgent climate and sustainability priorities set by the city and council. If we are told that we can't do this, that it's too hard, that it's too much work, that it's too many trees to protect, then we must be honest about what we forego, because trees are a piece of the life raft that we are all going to need. We strongly encourage you to adopt our recommendations of the ad hoc committee that are throughout the tree and landscape preservation and management ordinance. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Doria Suma, you can unmute and speak on the item for up to 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening, City Council and staff, and a big welcome to our new city clerk and our acting urban forester. I'm Doria Suma. I serve on the Planning Commission, but tonight I'm speaking as an individual. I'm not representing the Planning Commission. And as mentioned earlier, I'm part of the ad hoc residents committee that worked on the ordinance. So I want to describe some changes and additions that our committee feels would improve the ordinance. In general, we feel that the notification, review, and appeal process currently in the municipal code in sections 1877 and 1878 is well defined and should be extended to protected tree removal application process in some ways that I'll describe. We believe that the notification process for protected tree removal should be similar to other required notification for approvals, such as development, notifications and variances, etc., as described in section 1877. But in particular, we recommend the following. First, a two-step process to notify all owners and residents within a 600-foot radius of a protected tree removal application. This is consistent with other practices already established. The first notification would be shortly after the removal has been applied for, and the second after a determination to allow or deny removal has been made. Secondly, we recommend notifying all urban forestry partner organizations, and we would like to require a prominently posted notification at the property where the removal has been requested that is similar to those used for development project with details of the tree removal, location, species, etc. The current process only allows the applicant to appeal the decision to remove a protected tree. We recommend that in addition to the applicant, anyone dwelling or owning property within the 600 notification radius should be allowed to appeal. Sections 1877 and 1878 would need to be updated to reflect these changes, and we would recommend adding a bit more detail about the appeal process to make it clearer. A table similar to the table 1 in 1877 would be useful to clarify this. Finally, we recommend using the term buildable area rather than building area in the definition section in 81020 and throughout the ordinance. Buildable area is a more precise term than building area to define where development may occur on a parcel. So thank you so much for all your work and for your time this evening.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Karen Holman, you can unmute and speak on the item.
Thank you so very much. Good evening, and thank you for bringing this topic to the fore. I'm speaking tonight as a part of the citizen ad hoc that has submitted comments to you with suggested updates to the tree ordinance. Even with my long years experience reviewing the municipal code, I have renewed appreciation for staff and how difficult this can be. I'll highlight a few of our recommendations. 1, elevation of the urban forester to the level of assistant director. As Canopy has said in its letter to you, urban forests is at risk. The value of on the environment and economic fronts alone that this community-wide asset represents and merits the level of staff position that recognizes the importance of our living infrastructure. The position of assistant director will also send a clear message to the community that we do value what they also value, the majestic neighbors that they live with every day and that can suddenly disappear even with no notice. The position is currently listed at the manager level under public services and assistant director of public services, along with facilities maintenance, fleet manager, traffic control / street sweeping, and storm drain / street maintenance. We believe Majestic Oaks, for instance, merit higher consideration. Number 2, designated arborist. In order to promote unbiased analysis, the city identifies an appropriate professional in a number of situations and hires them at the applicant's expense. The applicant would pay for an arborist services in either scenario, but this practice helps to promote unbiased analysis. A designated arborist, which is what we are defining as a professional hired by the city, raises profile of tree analysis as the city would not be in what can be a defensive position of doing peer review. Number 3, the city has a number of natural creeks, and with those riparian environments can come riparian trees. We should not ignore these situations, even though in many instances the jurisdiction will be with the county or the JPA. There are instances, however, that private property owners simply may not be knowledgeable enough to know what is at stake in protecting these important trees in sensitive environments. And lastly, number 4, on packet pages 10 and 11, the staff brings forward numerous comp plan and urban forest master plan policies that support updates to the ordinance, such as we are recommending as well as they. We know you will seriously consider what is before you. The benefits from trees and what is derived from them includes the promoting of health, safety, welfare, quality of life of the residents, those doing businesses in our community. They address climate change by sequestering carbon. They provide a cooling effect. They reduce air and noise pollution. They prevent soil erosion and stormwater runoff. They provide animal and bird habitat. They enhance the aesthetic environment. And it is well known that trees enhance property values for both residential and commercial properties. Thank you very, very much for your consideration.
Thank you for your comments. Terry Holsimer, you can unmute and speak on the item.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I just want to take a few minutes to really endorse and support the significant changes to the tree protection ordinance that are proposed by the ad hoc group of citizens. If there is truly one essential element that I think we all agree on in Palo Alto, it is that we have a unique community that is truly focused on our environment and especially on our trees. Trees, especially those that are 10 years and older, are very important to our city and should receive special consideration, especially when office developments or large housing developments are considered. Recently, in my own neighborhood here in Mayfield, we have lost or are under threat of losing several large redwoods that we have all come to have loved and appreciated in our go around our city tree ordinance. I'd like staff to focus on things like saving and preventing the loss of these valuable trees.
Mr. Holzmer, I think you have a terrible connection. You're cutting in and out. I can't hear you anymore. Mr. Holzmer, are you still there? We'll come back to you if you can maybe reset your connection. I apologize. Rob Levitsky, you can unmute and speak on the item.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, I'm Rob Levitsky, and I'd kind of like to support all of the previous speakers who are in support of the trees. I'd like to mention truth to power, in that we already have an ordinance protecting oaks and redwoods, but it doesn't seem to be working because people in power can get around it. In my experience of the last 5 years, trying to save some trees that Castellea wanted to cut, they have been able to maneuver around things like Doria was talking about, the building area, the buildable area, the phony stuff like that, interpreting a conditional statement. If there's already something in here, then this isn't allowed, but it's ignored. And Dudek comes in and backs it up, and the city staff backs it up, and sometimes just hides the fact that the trees are biological resources by putting the trees in another category and then saying, well, we've already dealt with that because mitigation will take care of the problem. And the answer is you can't say just because we're going to plant a bunch of other little oaks that it's okay to kill this big one. Or the fact that, well, we're going to put a building there and the tree won't survive, so we'll kill it. And just a couple of months ago, the city council told Castellea to go make an effort to save some of these oaks and redwoods, especially in the center of their campus. And they come back right away and say, you know, we can't do that because this underground garbage dumpster is more important than this oak tree number 155. And tree number 140, another oak, well, it's kind of tired anyway, and I think it needs to go. And they've already killed a beautiful redwood early on in the process that got neighborhood opposition very strong. This is tree 112, 120-foot redwood that based basically on a bogus arborist report got signed off and murdered. And so it's kind of nice to say we're going to expand the canopy and we're going to add all these trees to it, but we don't seem to be able to protect the oaks and redwoods that are at number one on the list. And one of the things that the council had told Castellea, for example, and it's in your ordinance, is, well, save it if it's reasonable. Well, unfortunately, that's a very subjective thing. And what's reasonable to one person, you know, maybe to Castellea, removing a tree so they can have an underground garbage dumpster, is not the same as other people. Thank you for the time.
Okay, thank you for your comments. I do not seem, oh, Mr. Holtzmer, if you wanted to continue your comments, you cut out halfway through. Please raise your hand if you would wish to make additional comments. Okay. You can unmute and finish your comments, sir.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I just wanted to finish up, and I don't know exactly where it cut off, but I'd just like to remind that recently in my neighborhood, we lost or are threatened to lose several large redwoods. And I think that it's very important, instead of finding ways to evade or go around the city tree ordinance, we need to focus more on finding ways to saving and preventing the loss of these mature trees. I strongly support the modifications to the tree ordinance, Title 8. I also increasingly believe that formalizing a relationship between the urban forestry and the Parks Commission is very important. And finally, elevating the urban forester position to assistant director makes a lot of sense. So I urge you at this point to please support saving mature trees just as much, even when a developer says, oh, well, I can plant brand new trees over here. It's much more important to preserve and save the older trees because they already provide the needed environmental support to our communities. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Chair Koo, that was the last request to speak.
Thank you so much. So we'll come back to policy and services members. If you want to start with any questions or comments. Council Member Stone.
Thank you, Chair Koo. And first, welcome to Mr. Gollinger. Nice to have you with us. And I really loved that photo you showed on the slideshow. I don't know if it was the first or second slide, but immediately the second I saw it, I just felt so relaxed, which doesn't happen often in these meetings. And I thank you for that. And it was such a great way to kind of set the stage for this discussion, to really just show the importance of our tree canopy in Palo Alto, and really one of the many things that makes this community so special and worth living in are these trees, and especially in the fall. My God, just so beautiful. I'm so excited that it's coming up. So thank you for that. I just think it's a great way to be able to kind of start this discussion, and thank you to staff for your work on this. We're definitely moving in the right direction, and of course, thank you to the ad hoc committee for all the unpaid work that you did on this as well, and for your time tonight presenting. I do have several questions. First one, I was wondering, can staff just elaborate a little bit on the requirement in 8.10.50 about the Prohibited Acts section? On page 6, I think, of the staff report, it states that the canopy replacement will occur within 15 years. Does that mean that if an applicant intends to remove matured, non-protected trees, that the trees they replace those with under the no net loss policy will need to be at that same level of maturity as the existing trees within 15 years? I was a little just kind of confused by exactly what that means.
So this has to do with the replacement ratio that exists in the tree technical manual that was created by Dr. and all the rest of the staff. Basically, the estimates for the trees, a 24-inch box tree can be estimated to grow X amount per year. And so they used a standardized estimate of 15-year growth of a 24-inch box tree to calculate what the replacement ratio would be for a removed tree. So the estimate is that at 15 years, the required replacements for a removal would be equal to or greater than the existing area of the canopy of the tree removed.
Okay.
So usually the one big tree is taken out, they need to plant 4 more trees and to replace in 15 years, those trees should aggregate to the same canopy as the one that was removed.
Okay, in the aggregate. Gotcha. That's helpful. Thank you. Next question. If we protected all trees over 12 inches diameter, what do we know what percentage of the city's tree canopy that represents? I mean, the report went into percentage of our canopy for all these various widths. Do we know what it would be for about a foot?
So I did run the numbers for public trees, which are street trees and parks trees. And that's not necessarily what this is going to affect. This is going to affect private trees, but we really don't have a solid inventory for that. But we do have just under 36,000 trees in our public tree inventory. So those are street trees and parks trees. And the number of those that are over 18 inches are 12,110. So that's about 34%. So I didn't run the numbers for 12 inches, but I ran them for 18, 24, and 36.
Okay.
So at 18 inches, that's 34% of the population.
Okay, thank you. And then kind of following up on that, just to clarify, so section 810 only applies to landscape and preservation of trees on private property.
I'd have to look and see how it's specified. We as staff abide by 810. I don't know if it specifically calls out public trees in there.
Brad Eggleston here. I'll just say I'm not sure about that either, but I do know that we sometimes run across issues of protected trees on city capital projects where trees are on public property. And we work through the same issues of protected trees and replacements and mitigations.
Okay, similarly to on private property?
Yes.
Okay. I feel like that'd be something then that'd be good to kind of to maybe call out in the revised language. Especially, just with eventual turnover on staff to make sure that that continues to be interpreted in the same way in the future. Question on the values of trees. How's the values of trees determined? I mean, is it the age of the tree, or is it the environmental benefits that the tree offers to the community, or the economic benefits that it offers to the community?
Are you referring to like an appraised value of the tree?
Yeah, and so I mean, if we're looking at kind of penalties for an improper tree removal and what those penalties might be based on the values of trees.
So there is a document entitled The Guide for Plant Appraisals. I believe it's currently in the 10th edition. We are set up in the city to use the trunk replacement formula method that's included in the 9th edition. There's some minor updates to the 10th edition that we haven't included into our spreadsheet. But basically it calculates a relative value of the species of the tree, and it takes into account the size of the tree and the cost of a replacement, and it comes with an appraised value. So it's a standard method of evaluating mature trees for appraised value. It's one of the industry standard methods.
Okay.
And there is some allowance for environmental benefits. The arborist who's doing the assessment gets to rate the tree based on its appropriate benefits for the site, for its location on the site, and for some other factors having to do with its health. So you can rate it higher in those categories because it is say a native oak that's providing habitat. So there is a place in there for that to be accounted for.
Okay, so it's formulaic on how this is all done. Perfect. I think, this was kind of discussed a little bit in public comment. The ad hoc committee has suggested changing the current wording from area to footprint. Can staff explain kind of like what their understanding is of the difference between a building's area and a building's footprint?
I think that was in reference to buildable area of a site. as opposed to the building footprint. So the buildable area would be all of the area on the site inside of the setbacks that would be allowed for development. So that would be what would be considered the buildable area.
Okay.
We have a stipulation that if a tree impacts more than 25% of the buildable area, it could be removed. So that's one of our, we have, it's in there in multiple places, buildable area. So I think that's why they recommended that change.
Thank you. Under section 810-140, the processing of permits and approvals section. Sorry, I'm kind of out of order here. Regarding the timeline, if I'm wondering, because I saw like it would come back to PNS in February, then finally would go to City Council in April. If we skipped the need for this to come back to Policy and Services in February, can we then have, would it be able to go to the full council for final approval in February instead of April?
I think that's how I'd interpret that schedule. Yes, the thought is we would do the additional outreach, make whatever changes staff would recommend. And I think that we can either take those recommended changes directly to council or back to the committee.
Okay, thank you. I feel like this is really important. And of course, with increasing development occurring across the city, I think the sooner we're able to get this finalized, the better. Let's see. Oh, and wondering, Chair Koo, if I can ask a question of one of the ad hoc members.
Yes, please do.
Great, thank you. So any of our ad hoc members on here could, if you feel comfortable answering, I'd appreciate it. I was wondering, can you explain the significance and importance of changing? I guess in staff's draft, it talks about street trees, and I noticed in the draft that you're proposing, it says public trees instead. What's the importance of that language change?
Which individual would you like to speak, Chair?
Oh no, I feel like I'm in class again. All right. Well, I think I saw Jeff's hand go up first, so try to be fair.
Mr. Greenfield, you can unmute and answer the questions if you'd like.
Thank you, Councilmember Greer, for the question. In general, this is just it's a commonplace of understanding that when street trees are being referred to right now, it's any street, it's any public tree. It includes the trees that are on streets. It also includes trees in parks. It includes trees in other public areas. So it's just a simple clarification of what is already being, it's not changing anything in practice. It's just what we consider to be an improvement in nomenclature. And I defer to staff to see if they have a similar understanding of that, but we weren't intending this to be controversial.
You know, I mean, it makes more sense to me. It's saying public tree instead of street tree. When I read it, I didn't really understand why it ever would have been called street tree. But yeah, I mean, is that staff's understanding as well?
That is correct. We internally refer to all city maintained and owned trees as street trees. Primarily, that may have to do with our inventory system. They're all classified as street trees in our inventory, so that may be why staff refers to it that way. But it is appropriate to refer to them as public trees.
Okay.
And if I may, another example of where this applies as common sense, in South Palo Alto, where there typically aren't planting strips between the street and the sidewalk, and there's a setback of typically 7 feet. The trees in that 7 foot area is a public tree. Calling it a street tree is a little is confusing.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. And Mr. Greenfield, while I have you on, if the chair doesn't object to me continuing to ask you a couple more questions.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. You have a new suggested definition of protected trees. You expand that in your draft. It covers various species at different diameters of thickness. And I was wondering why is there a distinction between the different levels of thickness within these different trees?
Thanks for asking. This is something I tried to allude to in my compressed 3 minutes of time before you earlier. So right now we have a protection for 3 trees in the ordinance, in our existing ordinance. At 11.5 inches, valley oaks and coast live oaks are protected, and at 18 inches, coast redwood are protected. The staff proposal was to increase the extra protection for natives to a group of 20+ trees, and the predominance of those of the trees in that list is the 6 trees that we've suggested be protected. There's a lot of thought that protecting the large trees in the community that aren't, quote, bad trees, that aren't water guzzlers or aren't invasive species, there's a great value, in addition to protecting natives, to also extend protections to the larger trees within our community. And so that's the recommendation, to protect all trees that aren't on the specific lists at 18 inches or even less. And this is consistent with what our neighboring communities are doing, as stated in the staff report, which is kind of giving some comparative information on the protections that Mountain View, Menlo Park, East Palo Alto, perhaps another neighboring community is doing. So even suggesting a protection at 18 inches is pretty conservative, and it doesn't necessarily speak to the type of leading edge environmentalism that a lot of us consider to be commonplace in our community, and in Palo Alto to be environmental leaders. And so to be aggressive and be a leader on this, we want to be considering something like 12 inches.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I'm glad you included all that. And then this final question, I think it would be best be answered by both you, Mr. Greenfield, and maybe staff as well. I really liked the inclusion within 810-140 processing of permits and approvals section, and I think it's also included in the appeals section as well. Talking about the need for the all principal urban forestry partner organizations shall be notified. I really love that idea. My only kind of concern was how easily recognizable those principal urban forestry partner organizations the type of debate that could be around to make sure that, are certain ones being left out. That one concerned me a bit, though I love the idea. Maybe just the language of it needs to be tweaked, or maybe it's something that it's very clear to everybody what that is. So can you expand on that a little bit? And then I'd like to hear staff's thoughts as well.
Thanks for the question. I'd be happy to clarify what our intention is there. Today it's to include Canopy. Canopy is our principal partner. Tomorrow it may not be Canopy. And so the intention was to include generic language that it would include a partner that is involved with our urban forest at the level that Canopy is today and tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. I had a feeling that was the intent, but still, with the language, I appreciate that. I wonder, does staff have any thoughts on that?
In my first read through, that was my interpretation as well, was that it was to allow for future changes should we partner with a different organization.
Great, thank you. Those are all my questions for now, and I could circle around later for comments.
Great questions. A lot of mine too. Councilmember Tanaka, do you have any?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And thanks staff for your work on this, and thank you everyone for working on this as well. I know it looks like a lot of work went into it. I guess one thing I wanted to ask our interim forester here is, or arborist, there's discussion about the drought and potentially having to have just incredibly draconian water cuts, right? We're talking about like 60% like cuts. And, you know, I'm also on the Valley Water board, and they're talking like 70, 80, I mean, just like incredibly high numbers, right? And I guess one thing I'm just wanting to understand a little bit is, you know, we're definitely, unfortunately, experiencing climate change, and hopefully we can reverse it. But at least for the short term, it looks like it's going to get hotter and drier. And so how's that factored in? Because, like, you know, what's native for our city today may not be hard. It might be really hard to grow. Because I know, like, you know, a few years ago we had another drought. We had to stop watering their lawns, and, you know, a lot of redwood trees started to die, right? Or get diseased. And so I guess, can you, you know, factoring in climate change, and that, you know, it may be just almost impossible to actually provide the water to the trees that, you know, and you know, redwood trees aren't even actually that native to our area. How is that, like, how do you factor that in?
So that's a very good question. One thing that I would make sure that we consider, though, is that trees are one of the best ways that we can combat climate change. So I think it's in our best interest to do whatever we can to continue to preserve them. We have been promoting climate adapted or native species for some years now. That's one of the things that we recommend to any project that we're reviewing. And that's even more so now with the MWELO requirement, the Model Water Efficiency Landscape Ordinance. So that encourages climate adapted and native species. So over time, I think that that's going to increase the drought tolerance of our urban forest. That doesn't necessarily address the immediate concern of some of these high water users that we have as mature trees. And that is something we'll have to look into in more detail. But we do have a lot of high water users that are mature trees that we'd like to keep. But as you said, water is going to become a concern down the road. So that is something we'd have to look at.
To me, it would seem like, well, let me try to understand what's being proposed here, or what is here now, just to make sure I understand this correctly. So if, let's say, someone has a close redwood tree, right, and it's dying, and do they have to replace it again with a close redwood tree, or can they replace it with a different tree that may be like an oak tree that doesn't require as much water?
They can replace it with a different tree.
Okay.
The requirement, the replant requirements are based upon canopy size at 15 years. So we might recommend an oak instead of a redwood. Ultimately, the decision is theirs. As long as it's a climate adapted species, we would be okay with that.
Okay. Because I would almost, to me, what seems to make more sense is we should be encouraging, and I actually like the canopy as well. So I think, you know, I want to encourage it. I think that would makes our city very beautiful. So I actually really like it. But it just would seem to be wise for us to be focused. I mean, in fact, I kind of wonder, like, does it make sense to have a close redwood tree, you know, as the protected species, or should we really encourage more drought resistant trees that can provide the shade and beauty without, you know, the high water bill that's needed to keep it going? Like some people, like, for instance, some of my neighbors stopped watering their lawn and their redwood trees died, right? And so, I mean, they were told to do that. Well, at least, you know, through the bill they got. And so I guess I'm just trying to understand. I mean, I saw that a lot of new trees being put on there, but I mean, to me, it just seems like we should maybe be more selective as to which kind of tree, and that maybe we should have trees that are gonna, you know, be able to thrive in this drier, hotter climate that we're going through.
And I think at least on a staff level, we're not recommending planting of redwoods. We are still protecting the redwoods based on the ordinance because of their value to the community. You know, mostly as a symbol. They've been planted throughout the city for decades, and they're on our city seal. And I think that's why they're important. And I think we should make sure we continue to protect what we have, but we're not encouraging planting of new redwoods. We're encouraging more drought tolerant, climate adapted species when we recommend plantings.
So of the big list of trees, how many of them are that being proposed to be planted or protected? How many of them are drought resistant, and how many of them are like, one thing I heard from a geologist was that once upon a time Palo Alto was underwater, right? That this is why we have a very muddy, very clayish soils, because at one point in time the bay was really high. So what is native today may not be native tomorrow, and vice versa. Was native, 1,000 years ago may not be native today, right? Because the climate's been changing, right? I mean, I know there's people out there who think the climate is not changing, but most of the science says the climate is changing right now. So, I guess like I'm just trying to, maybe can you give that list of trees, and maybe just I'm just curious to know like how many of them, because to me I would not really be in favor of adding more trees that gobble up a lot of water. It just seems like it would be more wise to encourage. In fact, I think I like the idea of trying to slow down global warming by encouraging more trees being planted. I think that's a great thing. But I could see also the idea that perhaps planting more drought-resistant trees to replace some of the ones that take a lot of water could actually be a big benefit to us. So yeah, so of these trees, which ones are like kind of like drought-resistant, and which ones are like the coast redwood tree, which just requires a ton of water?
So I would say that all of the trees, with the exception of the blue trees and the redwood, could be considered drought tolerant. They're all relatively well adapted trees. Big leaf maple's borderline. It tends to be on the borders between riparian and not riparian. But the white alder is actually listed in the high water classification, so it would probably not be included in a final list. And these blue trees are riparian species, and in general, they would use slightly more water. That's one of the reasons I brought it to everyone's attention here, because they are listed in the Urban Forest Master Plan as being locally native. That doesn't mean they shouldn't be protected in a riparian setting, but I was thinking this was more along the lines of looking at individual residences, and most of them don't have creeks in their yards. So that's kind of why I wanted to bring that to our attention and discuss that further.
Yeah, I guess I would, to me, it doesn't make sense to be, I think we want to have really, really vast canopy. I'm really for that. And I have to live on a street that has that. And I think it makes it very beautiful, and it's very different from other streets which doesn't have that. So I think having that is really, really cool. Yeah, yeah, so I guess it would be kind of interesting to see by water usage, like which one. And I guess water usage plus, there's some trees that actually have more bang for the buck. Some trees that actually perhaps grow faster, right, or provide more, able to grow a bigger canopy faster, right? And ones that don't rip up the sidewalks, right, or rip up foundation. I guess it would be interesting to know some of that, so we could look at more practical matters about how. Versus just protecting everything, because some things that were native, maybe, back when the bay was underwater, or the Palo Alto was underwater, it made a lot of sense, right? But, as climate's been being drier and warmer, it probably doesn't make much sense. So that's something that I would like to really understand before approving more trees, right? Is what is the, which one is really well suited for the, desert-like climate that we're headed towards, unfortunately, right? And I think we should protect trees, or try to encourage trees to actually grow fast and provide that canopy for the very reason you mentioned, which is it helps prevent global warming. So I think that's great, right? So I think we should be a little bit more strategic about it versus just, and maybe there's some trees that aren't native to our city that we also want to encourage or protect, that are fast growers, right? And don't rip up sidewalks. I don't know what trees those are, but I'm looking for you as an expert here, who could tell us which one it is. And maybe there could be a chart of like, water usage, like a table, like with this, there's like the tree, how much water it is, how often do the roots rip up, foundations and sidewalks, I know some trees like drop a bunch of junk on people's cars and, require new paint jobs. So it'd be good to know, it'd be good to know, like for our kind of somewhat urban setting, how does that all fit in, right? Versus just, okay, here's a random list of trees. And I actually think that even, non-native trees that have really good characteristics, maybe we should consider those being protected too. So I think we should, just because I think was native is a constant moving thing. There's no such thing as a native tree, because what was, at one point in time, the earth was molten lava, right? And, so, I mean, what's native is changing all the time. So it's hard to say what is native, right? And I think we just have to look at where things are headed and make sure that we have the right mix of stuff there. In fact, I would almost go further than just protect trees. I think we'll, and maybe this is beyond the scope of this meeting, but I'd like to actually see like perhaps some sort of encouragement or incentive to plant trees, right? I think that would be even, it's not just protecting trees, but also planting trees so we actually grow the canopy. I think that would be great too. So I know there's considerations, like we also have a lot of power outages, and a lot of that's caused because we have a lot of trees and they go into power lines. So we have to kind of, I think we just have to be, we can't just use a blanket, let's protect all trees, right? I don't think that's going to work. But I do think we could also work on trying to create more incentives to plant trees, like bonuses, right? Maybe people plant trees, they have bonuses. I don't know, but that's something I'll be open to, something I think we should explore. And then the other thing I want to understand is, I mean, let's say someone replaces a protected tree, but they want to plant a tree that's more, is going to provide better canopy, going to grow faster, but it's not a protected one. Can they do that, or it must be another protected tree? That's the other thing I'm curious about.
So it is not required that they plant a protected tree back in place of a protected tree.
Okay.
We would encourage that because of the species that are protected. I mean, we would prefer to have oaks, but it's not required.
Well, the oaks seem to be pretty water tolerant, right? In terms of, at least for my house, the oaks seem to be doing okay versus redwood trees. But is that true, or is that just my impression?
There's a wide variety of oaks, but the oaks that were listed as native or close natives are all relatively drought tolerant.
Oh, I see.
And
Okay.
they actually don't like summer water.
Oh, I see. Okay. And then I just also want to understand. So, if let's say your protected tree is dying, or you have to replace it for whatever reason, does it have to be planted in the same location, or is there flexibility? Is there plans in this ordinance to change that, or is it to give flexibility where it could be placed at different places? Because maybe it's like, growing into a power line. Maybe that's not the best place for the tree. Maybe you should go somewhere else, right? So I guess I'm just trying to understand what is the flexibility in moving the trees to maybe better locations, maybe where there's more sunlight, or where there aren't obstructions, where the roots could grow, more freely and stuff.
It's simply required to be planted on the site, not necessarily in the same location.
So there's no plan to change that, right?
No.
Okay, perfect. And then the other thing I'm just thinking about also is genetic diversity, because I think also, I know, like I don't know if it happened here, but I know that like when I used to live in LA, there was like elm trees, right? And I think there was like I think it was elm trees. I forgot what it was, but there was like a lot of elm trees planted. Then suddenly all of them got the same disease. I forgot what it's called. And so I'm just also curious about like genetic diversity, because I think that's also important to make sure that we have a robust canopy. So how's that considered in this?
I think that by not endorsing any one particular species, that we're doing that. We're more endorsing a classification and a set of characteristics rather than a single species. So we're encouraging primarily natives, but more importantly, climate adapted, drought tolerant species that produce a canopy. That's what we're encouraging.
And then do you guys have, and I don't know where it is in this report, maybe you could tell me what page it is, but like a comparison of all the other cities and their protected trees in terms of how many different trees, just so we see a comparison to see how this stacks up against other cities. Is there a table somewhere that I could look at?
I'm pretty certain, council member, that's not something that's included in this report. I I think we do have some information like that, but we haven't compiled something that globally looks at different cities.
Okay. I mean, it doesn't have to be all cities in the world, but nearby cities would be kind of useful just to know like how, how onerous this is or how easy it is compared to other cities. So that's something that, I would be interested in seeing, if I eventually have to vote for this, I would want to
Actually,
see that.
I think packet page 7 has some brief mention about Menlo Parks ordinance. There's also Redwood City, Sunnyvale, East Palo Altos. I know that paragraph actually talks about the diameter of the trees, not the species. However, I think it refers back to the species for some of the cities, like Menlo Park protects oaks over 10 inch.
Yeah.
And all other trees over 15 inches.
Yeah,
And on and on.
I saw that, Chair. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. I did see that. But I was looking from like maybe something a little more like a table, and then also like how many, like a comparison table, right? So how many protected trees there are, and then like, I know some of it's here, but it'd be a little bit nicer to see like a bit of a more detailed comparison. But this is better than nothing. So thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. Okay. Is this something that staff thinks they could, if this goes to council, something that staff could try to pull together?
I think to the extent we can contact some of our neighbors and they have that information available to share with us, certainly. Peter, do you have any thoughts to add to that?
No, I think that a comparison table of our surrounding neighbor cities is something that we could do.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for the questions. Many of mine were answered. I wanted to ask, we talk about the diameters of the trees for measurement and when it's, how far to protect it. So how, can you help me understand how you measure it, the diameter?
Yeah, so there is something that's called a D tape or a diameter tape, and it measures the circumference of the trunk at a standard height. And
a foot is what the
yeah, I believe it's usually it's 54 inches. It's 4 foot something. It's spelled out in the ordinance, but you measure the circumference and then the tape will show you the diameter. Most ordinances also list the circumference in parentheses so that you have both measurements. I believe our ordinance has it listed it with both measurements.
Okay.
The existing ordinance even.
Okay, and then
it specifies in there how to measure it. So
okay, so it does it does specify already in the ordinance.
Yes.
And what does DBH stand for? It says 10 inches DBH.
That's the abbreviation for the measurement. That is the classic definition, which is diameter at breast height. And then we've standardized the height. There's another term as well called diameter DSH, diameter at standard height. And we as a staff have not decided how to refer to that. It's in all of our existing documents as DBH. So that's how we're currently still referring to it.
Oh, okay. How about BDH? I think it's in the, does East Palo Alto measure theirs in a different manner? Because I'm in that packet page.
That's likely a typo on my part.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. I thought there was a different measurement, another acronym to memorize. So, most the trees that are by the creeks here in Palo Alto, the creeks obviously is, if I remember correctly, is Valley Waters, right? And so would they fall under Valley Waters jurisdiction? And the reason I ask that is since there, would that be considered as also under city limits, and would we be protecting those trees as well?
That's not something I have a ready answer for.
Okay.
Jody or Brad, do you have any take on that?
Yeah, so many times, sorry, Jody Gerhart, manager of current planning. Many times Valley Water does come into jurisdiction when we're below the top of bank. And so down the slope of the creek is where other agencies would start to be involved. And usually it's interdisciplinary that many different, everyone has jurisdiction. And so we're kind of layering on top of each other.
Oh, that's interesting. But if it's above, if the tree is on the banks, that would fall under Palo Alto, or is that still, what was your?
Everything's in Palo Alto. It's just once you start getting into the creek itself, then other agencies also have jurisdiction.
Because in Barron Park on the Matadero Creek, there are trees that are, I would think that are above the, not within the banks, but they have ivy all around it. If I understand correctly, ivy is also a huge strangler of trees, right? So who would be maintaining those trees?
We'd have to look into exactly where that tree is located, but you know, Valley Water is maintaining most of the sides of the creeks. But yeah, at what level they maintain them, I don't know.
Okay. And then, so I appreciate Councilmember Tanaka's questioning about, you know, water guzzler trees and so forth. But my understanding is that we continue to protect the existing ones and preserve the existing ones that are continuing to grow, but we're not really encouraging planting any more of those, especially in areas that doesn't have as much water. I think that's what I understood it to be, and I see nod. So the other question I had is, so I was included in an email from Ms. Martineau, Catherine, and in one of the Sacramento Regional Water, I think it's, yeah, Sacramento Regional Water Authority. They actually, I believe, have said that watering trees is exempt from water restrictions and schedules as long as water-wise techniques are used. And then they go ahead and give what are some of these water-wise techniques. Our trees are not exempt from these exemptions at this point, from these restrictions, I'm sorry, at this point.
So the Sacramento changes there, that basically that is allowing residents to water on non-water days or water outside of watering hours. It doesn't necessarily increase their allotment, and they still are being charged for the water. They're just allowed to water at different times if they're following the water guidelines.
Okay. And the water guidelines can be as simple as having a nozzle that stops water from flowing, so it's not just kind of running all over. So they have all these techniques in place that they, so is that something that we can do, or does that have to be arranged with Valley Water?
I wouldn't know where to start with that.
Can I just jump in and say that because I don't think we're actually in Palo Alto subject to Valley Water's rules directly with our own utilities department providing water. So there may be some things we're implementing, but that's something that we as Public Works could definitely go back and check what the current status is of what we're enforcing in Palo Alto.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. I think most of my questions have been answered. I mean, I've been in touch with the ad hoc committee, so there are a lot of things that they have already implemented. in some of the items that are requested in the staff report. So we can go for a second round. I see Councilmember Tanaka's hand is up. So at this point, we can do questions and comments if you want.
Thanks, Chair. Quick question. So if somebody stops watering their tree, their protected tree, and it dies, what happens?
It depends on the situation. It would currently be considered a violation because they're not caring for their protected tree. I don't know if there's any enforcement available to us, but it would be in conflict with the recommendations in the tree technical manual.
Currently, what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. How do we balance that with there's also like drought restrictions and there are pending drought restrictions coming? How do you balance that out, right? Where you have these kind of conflicting rules. Like what is what are residents supposed to do, right?
Can I jump in just to say that I think that kind of conflict really has to do with the discretion that we take in deciding when to take enforcement. So while something might technically be considered a violation, I don't think that under severe drought restrictions and someone stopped watering their lawn and a protected tree died, it would be very unlikely that we would react with some kind of enforcement action.
I think we should clarify that then, because I think rather than make people live in the gray, I think we should clarify that if there's a drought and you stop watering your lawn and your tree dies or gets sick, right? It's not, you're not going to jail, right? Type of thing. Or you get some sort of onerous penalty. At least for me, I think that should be something that should be clarified. What do other cities do?
I don't have any current information on our neighboring cities regarding drought and lack of watering of trees, but I can definitely look into that.
Okay. Because I'm just trying to think of like, could you actually compel someone to water the tree, even if, let's say they don't want to, or they don't want to pay the big water bill, or they're restricted because of the drought? Like it seems like it would be unreasonable. Maybe the way you would make this work is they could just go plant a more drought resistant tree and let the current tree die. Maybe that's the answer. I don't know, but it just seems like that's something which I think you should watch some of these or attend some of these valley water meetings, but they're pretty dire in terms of what the forecast is, in terms of like the amount of water we're gonna get. Anyways, I just think that's something I think we have to keep in mind. So I don't think we should have this conflicting ordinance. I don't think it's fair to the people of our city that they're left in this hard spot.
Councilmember Stone.
Thank you, Chair Koo. And just to, I think Councilmember Tanaka makes a good point there. And actually, in the draft of the ad hoc committee, what I really like, I like a lot of it. One thing that I think kind of addresses your concern is under 81070 care of protected trees. It adds language. It says all owners of property containing protected trees shall follow the maintenance standards in the tree and landscape technical manual. And then the included language, including avoiding any action foreseeably leading to the death of a tree or permanent damage to its health. And then it goes on. And it does talk about reduced watering, issues like that. So I think that type of language is good language to be able to clarify your exact concern there. That foreseeability is going to be able to help there, because I think that removes it from just being someone's fault for not being able to water because of those water restrictions that you're talking about. So I think that's some good language that will be able to help mitigate some of those concerns. Few other thoughts. I mean, just overall, I really like the additional language that the ad hoc committee is including. I shared a lot of the concerns and frustrations that Mr. Levitsky talked about in his public comments about in the past. our tree ordinance is being used many times in a way to almost seem to justify tree removal, when I know Mr. Levitsky and others and myself have argued it should be the opposite. You know, the intent of the tree of our tree ordinances should be to protect trees, not find loopholes to be able to remove them for development. And I think not only what staff is proposing here, but also the additional language of the ad hoc committee is really bringing us more to the purpose and intent of this ordinance, which is really to both preserve and expand our tree canopy. And I really also love the purpose statements that are included within the ad hoc committee's recommendation, really just making it clear what it is that we're trying to do. One suggestion I would have, if we pursue, and we do, incorporating the ad hoc committee's recommendations, I think within the purpose statement, they included all these great reasonings around climate change. But one thing that Karen Holman mentioned in her public comment talked about the positive impact on property values, both residential and commercial, on preserving the tree canopy. So I think we should add that into the purpose statement as well. Looking through my notes here. I think the increase in notice requirements is really important. I really like that the ad hoc committee is recommending that appeals should apply to both residential and multifamily, and within that 600 feet of the proposed tree removal. I think that's really important. It never made sense to me that only the applicant could appeal the loss of a tree, especially a protected tree, as a community issue and a community concern, and members of the community, especially those who are directly impacted within a 600-foot proximity, should have that right to be able to appeal. I think we need to make sure we clean up some of the language between 1877 and 1878, so it's consistent with what we're recommending here in 804 and 810, just so for people who are cross-referencing the two sections can have that consistency. I also think it's a really great idea that we elevate the urban forester. I mean, if you look at the org chart, and I don't know if staff has it readily available. If not, that's okay. But currently, the status of the urban forester is very, very low, and I think that makes it difficult for the urban forester to be able to assert the type of the type of kind of expertise and authority on these issues as is required in these areas. Yeah, and I think we have a great public works director, but public works directors oftentimes, probably most of the time, are not tree experts. And so I think elevating the urban forester to an assistant director level is a really great idea. And I think the fact that our primary tree organization, Canopy, their letter really just did a great job at pointing out to just the importance of this work, and really celebrating the work that the ad hoc committee did, as well as what staff has done. I don't want to disparage all the great work that staff has done as well. I think the two really complement each other. And then just finally, a few thoughts on just, I think, more future stuff that staff and policy and services can work on. I think it's going to be really important to put in protections for setbacks to be required to protect trees, open space and development as well to protect trees for non-residential and multifamily. I think those are all really important issues that we need to address that we haven't yet. It's clear that we need to continue to work on enforcement issues and penalties. I understand that's going to be an ongoing issue, especially with staffing concerns, and especially now that we're going to be expanding the definition of protected trees, but an area where we need to work on. And also one other thought, just we also need to address permeability issues when it comes to artificial grass. And I know I think we're going to be seeing a lot more residents and commercial wanting to install artificial grass with ongoing droughts and likely future droughts. So making sure that artificial grass, that water can permeate through that artificial grass into the ground are all issues that are related to this, understandably not being addressed right now, but I hope can be addressed in the future. I think those are all my thoughts for now.
Thank you, Councilmember Stone. I think a lot of the points that you mentioned was part of what I was going to also mention. So I appreciate all that you have said, and I hope we take note of that. And so with that, I think we can probably, I know most of you have been, had stayed up late and was greeting the morning with all of us at the council meeting this morning. So in an effort to get this moving, I will go ahead and make a motion. But before I go ahead and do that, I'd like to say that trees are a topic, that is pretty heightened right now, environmental, and it's a big environmental and community conversation, especially in light of what is going on around the world with all the destruction and the heat waves and fires and so forth. And trees are responsible for significant greenhouse gas reductions, and it is the pride of Palo Alto. So much so that we have an urban forester and an urban forest master plan. They're identified and elevated in the comprehensive plan as our living infrastructure. And Palo Alto itself is named after a tree, right? And we're home to our partner organization, Canopy. We oftentimes plant trees in order to honor people and to signify events. And we are Tree City, USA, right? So there's so many benefits that the trees provide. There are heat reduction, as I said earlier. Air pollution, it's one of the cheapest, least expensive forms of clean air, production of clean air. It has energy emission reductions. It improves our water quality, even flooding reductions, right? There's also planting of trees in order to have noise reductions, protection from UV radiation, improved aesthetics, improved human health. It can just go on and on with it. But regularly, I do hear from residents who are concerned about the number and size of trees that are being cut down. These are great community losses. And so it is time that we address more definitely when, how, and why trees can be removed. And it's through this update to this ordinance, Title 8. So I do want to thank staff for bringing this update forward. It has taken a long time to get it to this stage, and so I would urge that we expedite in addition to being diligent about this. Canopy has been working with us for many, many years, and so I do want to thank them. And of course, they were consulted on all the ad hoc's submission. So I want to thank them for sharing their expertise as well as adding to our tree protection population. I'm sorry. And I want to say also a huge thanks to the community for their input, the resident ad hoc committee. They've put in a huge effort in support of our tree canopy, both in terms of ways to protect trees, but also to add transparency to the process, which does not really exist right now. So I do have a motion that I have sent to the clerks, and it's up on the monitor. Thank you, Ms. Milton and Ms. Kang. The first one is to accept the red line changes to the, I'm sorry. I wanted to see if I have a second for the motion. Thank you, Councilmember Stone. Would like to recommend to council to accept the red line changes to a tree ordinance, including the errata presented by the resident ad hoc group. Then to direct staff to update red line section 8.10.055 to include a 30-month building moratorium consistent with the staff report recommendation, to consider adding additional restrictions. For initiating planning and development review after approved protected tree removal in the absence of proposed development. I want to accept staff report recommended ordinance changes to section 8.04.05A1, 8.10.010, and 8.10.04B. To direct staff to additionally update the ordinance as follows. Add moratorium recommendation to 8.10.055 and a placeholder moratorium time length recommended is going to be between 24 to 36 month range. Direct staff to make associated changes required in other code section chapters to provide clarity and eliminate conflicting or circuitous language such as delete language in 18.78.010A, referring back to 8.10.140. Elevate the position of the urban forester to assistant director level in the Public Works Department. Direct staff to follow up on previous discussion with the Parks and Recreation Commission about the PRC serving as community forum for urban forestry issues and advising City Council on matters related to the Urban Forest Master Plan and other appropriate activities of the Urban Forest section. And Policy and Services recommend that staff forward our recommendations to Council for consideration in September, consistent with staff recommendation. Sir, Mr. Eggleston.
Oh, thank you, Chair Koo. I'm just taking a look at the motion and wanting to make sure that we understand it. Like I note that H talks about bringing recommendations to council for consideration consistent with the staff recommendation. But just to be clear, the staff recommendation was essentially to ask council to direct staff to proceed with community engagement on the remaining changes, and then have a process that would result, at least as we recommended it, in coming back to Policy and Services and then to council as a final step for approval.
Right.
So I guess I'm asking, I'm not quite certain what the consistent with staff recommendation means in this instance.
In this instance, it'd be to return to take the recommendation to council in September. And to let council give the direction on next steps.
Chair Koo, I wonder if you're interested in adding to H for it to essentially bypass PNS in February and return to the full council for final vote in February.
Actually, if it does not have to return to PNS, perhaps it could come back. It could go back to council earlier after they have whatever instructions they give to staff. And if there's no other questions.
I have a question as well, Chair Koo.
Mm-hmm.
For item F on elevating the position of urban forester to an assistant director level position, I know that would be something usually that would be done at least through the budget process and evaluation of sort of the staffing structure. So I'm wondering if there's a way to make that more a recommendation to evaluate sort of I'm struggling with words. Sorry, I was a midnight presentation yesterday, but more saying evaluating the position within the department or something to that effect that just lets us know the question is on the authority of the position as opposed to making the recommendation instantly that it would be elevated. I just wanted to point that out. And Molly, I'm not sure if that's the one you wanted to speak to as well.
So this is just a recommendation to council to elevate that position. But if you want to say recommend to council to evaluate the elevation of the position, I can work with that
Yeah,
if my seconder.
and Molly, did you want to weigh in? I'm thinking I may have some words for it, but I believe Ms. Stump may have some more eloquent ideas.
Right, so I was asking myself whether I needed to comment at this stage. I think at the recommendation stage, I think the way we would interpret this is consistent with council's role versus the manager's role. And as Ms. Cotton Gaines pointed out, the council's role is to approve positions in the budget. So I think this is really shorthand for council approving a certain level of position in the budget, but whether to actually how that position is compensated and how to set up reporting structures and whether to fill a position at that level or to fill it at another level is really an administrative issue that goes to the core of managing the city workforce. And that's something that the manager does.
So would we be able to say something like recommend to city council to consider asking the city manager?
I think it really is about establishing the position in the budget. Yeah, I don't know whether the manager and the department head have had a chance to evaluate this idea and give you input, but I would recommend that that I think this is what the committee is leaving room for, is that council also get that input from the professional staff about how the position lines up with other positions of its type in other agencies and within our own agency before making a final decision on that.
So like yesterday at council where there were a couple of positions that was recommended, and I don't have the language here with me right now.
Right. Right. So yesterday. So exactly. So the staff was recommending the council allocate resources either through the creation of positions or dollars that would be used to fund contract services or overtime services in certain functional areas. And that is council's core activity. So elevate I think evaluate the
evaluate or consider.
Yes, the reallocation of the position in the budget to the assistant director level.
Thank you.
Ms. Cotton Gaines, did you have a?
Yes, I was thinking within that same idea of the evaluation of it as a funding question, and then also the administrative side of that is just that consideration of where in the organization and the comparison to other agencies and the reporting structure. So I think the evaluate and consider the reallocation, I think gives us enough room for Mr. Eggleston and his team to do that research necessary. And if the council wanted to allocate the resources for an additional assistant director, I think this gives the council enough room to do that as well.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
I wanted to, I think DI has already been addressed. Mr. Gollinger, the language for the moratorium, D and I, so item D and DI has already been addressed, right? The moratorium language?
No, I think we were recommending it, but it's not in our current draft.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry. I may have, I think I've already addressed it in item number B. So if we can just erase D and DI, it's already been addressed in item B. Because it talks about, I actually added a 36-month building moratorium.
And then updating the lettering.
Mhm. A, B, C, and then E becomes D. Thank you, Miss Milton. Or maybe it's Miss King.
It's the mighty team in the background.
Yeah.
And just a clarification, if I might, through the chair, for item G, did you, which was previously item H, did you officially make any changes to that?
No.
Okay, thank you.
And with that, I think we can go ahead with the vote.
Actually, if I might comment, Chair, just a couple of things. Just in no particular order, the consideration in September is something we will need to look at in terms of your council agenda load that month. And certainly understand and respect the direction as expressed by the committee. So I'll work with the mayor and vice mayor in looking at the calendar accordingly. On the issue of perhaps F, this suggests related to the PRC. I think this does tie to the area that Director Eggleston raised earlier about the community engagement process and how that would be structured. So it might be appropriate to do some rewording of that to reflect that the PRC discussion and advising the council is something that clearly the council will want to discuss, but perhaps opens the door to a broader question of how community engagement would proceed from here. So if appropriate, you might want to modify some of the language there. And then back on the issue of the urban forester position, just agree that there are fiscal impacts of that beyond the position itself, including reporting positions and expectations, because as was noted earlier, the overall changes to the ordinance are likely to require an increase in staffing for the urban forestry team itself. So there is a body of work there that I think the term evaluate and consider would allow. We just want to be clear that that's actually a body of work, I think, that may be a slightly bigger price tag than the committee may be anticipating, but that's just something we'll need to look at later.
So thank you. Did you want to see the item F?
It might be, yeah, on that one, it might be appropriate for the council to discuss and direct staff on how the PRC would, as well as potentially, I think there was reference to the Architectural Review Board, but just discuss and direct staff on the role of the Parks and Rec Commission.
Okay.
Relative to everything else, that's fine.
Right. It was mostly just to recommend for council to discuss. All right.
Chair Koo, real quick on G, because the language isn't in there. Did you want to include that it bypass PNS in the winter and just go directly to council for the final vote?
Since it's going to council, we're recommending it to go to council. So we'll let council decide at that point. I don't think it's necessary to come back to PNS, but I think council can make the determination at that time.
Okay. How
they want to proceed. Councilmember Tanaka.
Okay. Want to just understand this. Are there incentives to plant trees? Do we have that in the city, or is that being contemplated? And if so, what are they?
Did you say are there incentives to plant trees in the city?
Yeah, exactly.
Mr. Eggleston, do you have any information on that one?
I was looking for Mr. Gollinger, actually. I know we do have programs to encourage planting trees, especially in South Palo Alto, where we've identified a deficiency of trees relative to North Palo Alto.
Okay.
Peter,
I
is
guess
there
that's
something more
something
you can
which
say
I'll,
about that?
sorry, go ahead.
That's correct, but as far as I know, there's no financial or other incentives currently for planting trees.
Okay, I don't know if the maker or second of the motion would consider maybe having staff explore that possibility, so that it's not just protecting trees, but also you're trying to grow our canopy.
That's okay with me.
Okay, so maybe that can be H then. And then,
Could I ask the seconder if he's okay?
oh,
with
I think he shook his head. So
Sorry.
Okay. Second thing is, and I talked about this earlier during my questions, is can we get, and I think Peter already said he could do it, but like a table of, I guess, two tables. One is like of the trees, like just kind of like drought resistance, how fast does the canopy grow? In fact, I think the public would actually find this very useful, because I think most of the public really, maybe a lot of people are environmentalists and would love to actually try to help help with global warming. So if they knew actually which trees grew fast, then they don't take a lot of water, and don't tear up the sidewalks. I think a lot of people would like to know that. So I think, but as a council member, I like to see this as well before deciding what exact trees should be protected versus not protected. So can we have that request for staff to do as well?
Yeah, I think that might be something that belongs in the tree and landscape technical manual.
Well, I guess for me, I would feel uncomfortable protecting trees, especially if the water guzzlers, or they tear up sidewalks, or like they take forever to grow or something like that. I think we should be more selective as to what trees. So that's why I would like to know, and maybe other council members would like to know. But I think this would be useful just for the community, because a lot of people probably would like to know what kind of tree what's a good tree for our city. So I think there's multiple reasons why this would be good to have. And Peter said he could do it too, so why not?
Yeah, how much, can I ask stuff, how much work that's going to be involved? I mean, is there a one of those organizations that might already have these kind of information that might be able to help you with that?
I think it's probably not too difficult for us to put some basic information together if the interest is like relative rate of growth and water use of trees.
And also sidewalk tear up or foundation tear up, because I think that's also important to people, right? Because they don't want a tree that's going to trash their house or trash the sidewalk, probably.
Unfortunately, the impact on infrastructure in the ground is a little more nebulous. A lot of that depends upon the quality of the soil and the type of watering that's done. Some trees could be great and not interfere much with the sidewalk at all if they're watered properly, but if they're watered shallowly, they could tear up the sidewalk. So that's not as straightforward as water requirements and growth rate.
Okay. Well, 2 of the 3 would be great, but I think a lot of people would like to know sidewalk or driveway or foundation issues, but I understand what you're saying. Maybe, I don't know if there's a way to do it where, like I heard some trees that have really deep roots and some trees don't. I'm not sure if that's true or not, or it's just the nature of how you water a tree. You tell me, because I'm not a tree expert.
Are you looking for staff?
Yeah, looking for Peter's answer. Like I don't know how whether a tree. I don't know if it's a function of the genetics of the tree or it's a function of how you water the tree.
It's a combination of both, and that's why it's a little more difficult to pin down. There is some rule of thumb about specific species that impact infrastructure more than others. Primarily, that has to do with seeking water more so than interrupting concrete.
Okay. Well, I guess. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Chair.
No, go ahead.
I guess maybe maybe it wouldn't be so specific. Leave it up to staff to kind of figure it out. But basically, just understand, the tree parameters, right? And it's not like they could do two of them. The third one may be harder, but I don't know. Maybe they'll find something that makes it easy to do. But I think for me, I would feel much more comfortable expanding the list of protected trees if I knew which were trees well suited for our drier climate.
And we can definitely assemble a list of that displays growth, speed, and water requirements with the list of proposed species. That's an easily done.
Would the maker and seconder be amenable to that?
Yeah, I am. Mr. Stone?
So just sorry to be clear, so this is just informational. This isn't
Informational, yeah.
limiting. Okay.
Yeah.
Then that's fine.
Informational.
I'm okay with that.
Okay, great. And then let's see. And the other one I asked about earlier was comparison to other cities. So we could see how this ordinance would stack up against other cities. And so, you know, I would say like the adjacent, like Mountain View, Menlo Park, right? EPA, just nearby cities. We don't have to kill ourselves and go like up and down California, but just the nearby cities, we know how different this is.
Can I ask different as in what kind of species?
Oh, no. I mean, the tree ordinance, right? The proposed tree ordinance, how much more? I know we have like that on page 7 of the packet page. We have that mini, it's very brief, but something a little more exhaustive than that. I think staff can indicate they could do that, but I don't know if the maker or seconder would accept that amendment.
I actually think that at this point, yeah, I think we're trying to get it to come back in September. So I'd like to focus on some of the actionable items that are actually going to protect and preserve. And right now, getting this ordinance through is one of the more higher priorities for me.
Okay, understood. I mean, in terms of if I eventually vote for this on council, now really would depend on that information, because if we find that it's, you know, not that different from what other people are doing, it's not that onerous, sure, right? But if it's like way out there, right, and we just don't know, that could also be an issue. So.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But okay, anyways, that's where I'm coming from on it, but understand your position. Okay, and then the other one, and something I asked about earlier, which is I just don't think it's fair to leave people like with a knife over their head about the drought penalty, where if their tree dies because there's a drought and you're not supposed to water your landscape. I don't think people should be penalized. I don't think there should be any sort of penalty or fair penalty for that. So I don't know if the maker would support that or not, but if so, then I'd like to make that aye.
Actually, no. I think that would be a discussion for council when they're reviewing the draft ordinance.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, and the next one here is so going to E. So how much more is this going to cost us?
I'm
not asking the staff. Sorry. Yeah.
That it's something we haven't assessed yet.
Okay, because we're in pretty dire budget constraints right now, so I'm going to be pretty reluctant to support E. Yeah, I mean, unless I'm told it's just a title change and no dollar increase. But if there's a dollar increase, I don't know. I mean, I just feel like maybe we could hire more police officers or something like that. So I don't know if staff could give me a feel on that, but that's kind of important to me.
I think, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Shikata, go ahead.
Yeah, let me just add and expand on my earlier comments that this specific change does relate also to the ordinance changes that will be ultimately recommended or are being recommended by the committee and ultimately considered by the council. So with the expansion of duties, there is a kind of this magnitude of work that will need to be evaluated. So I'd really like the department to take a closer look at the volume of work involved in order to estimate a fiscal impact. So that information is not available right now, but certainly is something that, you know, we'll be able to put together as the information becomes clear.
Well, I assume this would mean that this will cost us more money, not less. But unless you tell me this is going to cost us less money, is it going to cost us less money or more?
Well, in terms of salary expenses, there will be salary expenses. I think what, from a fiscal standpoint, things we need to look at will be, you know, the ability for, that's the right word, fees to cover some of the expenses, as well as just overall the mix of funding sources and the like. But lest I forget, there is the value presented by the expansion of the urban forest. And so, you know, there's a fiscal impact for the salary expense, but there's a value of the urban forest growth. And so wouldn't want to talk about one without recognizing the other.
Well, I probably can't support E just because I just feel that we're in dire budget constraints still, and it would not be appropriate to waste more on that. Unless, you know, this somehow saves money, then I'm all for it. But if it's going to cost us more, then I don't think I want to do that.
We don't really know, right? Because it's asking staff to look into it and then to bring it to council to discuss and to consider. So at this point, we really don't know.
Yeah, maybe we don't know, but to me, it just seems likely that if you, I don't know. I mean, probably the city manager has this memorized, but I don't know exactly the price difference between these people, but it seems like probably the assistant director is gonna make a lot more than the urban forester, but I don't know if that's true or not. And so to me, it seems like this is going to cost us more, unlikely to cost us less. But if staff tells me like, oh, this is definitely going to cost us less, and I'm all for it. But if it's not, then I don't think I'm going to be able to support that.
No, forgive me for skipping for staff right now. I don't think they can tell you anything right now.
Okay.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Chicago.
You are correct. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Yeah. So much of I mean, in general, I really support, you know, protecting our urban forest and actually doing more of this. So I'm some parts of this I'm really supportive of. So I don't. I mean, we have A through H. We could split the motion, or I mean, I don't know. It's not going to matter too much because I think there's only three of us here. So, but we could just vote. But I mean, there's a lot of it I support. So we could also split it to you guys if you want. But we have to do it. We have to do one at a time. But it's up to you.
Oh, I don't think we'll do one at a time. But I can.
That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. I think we'll get a chance to talk about this again in council. But I in general, I really do want to promote our urban forest. I really think that's an important, essential thing, and so I would like to be able to support this at the end. And you know, but you guys know some of the things I'm looking for, right? I mean, if we could get like a comparison table of the cities for council, you know, and it doesn't look too onerous, I'm all for it, right?
Councilmember Tanaka, how about we split out E for a vote?
Yeah, E is definitely
So
something I
if
can't support, but the other one that makes me worried, and so there's enough of these.
So you have more that you're worried about?
Well, B is like 36 months is a long time, right? So that's the other thing I'm thinking. Wow, that's a long time, right? So I know that.
Split out E for you, but I think I'd like to keep the rest of it all together.
Yeah, I know. So it's okay. I mean, like there's some I'm really in favor of, like H I'm really in favor of, and yeah, I mean, I think, you know, F sounds wonderful, right? And in general, I like the idea of you know, things that promote our urban forest. In general, I like it, right? So, but there's like B seems like, wow, that's a lot, and E, you know, I'm you know, as you know, I'm kind of allergic to spending more money, so I'm like really not into that. So I'm like, I don't know about that one, right? But in general, I like the idea of having a more robust urban forest. I think that's great, right?
So, Councilmember Tanaka, since this is going to go to council for discussion, why don't we just keep A through H all together, and then we can discuss further in council?
Yeah, that's fine. I don't want to I mean, yeah, I think you guys know my point, and we're gonna get a chance to talk
Yes.
about this again, but so we don't have to, but that's, if I were to, we were to slice and dice, that's probably how it's slice and dice. So we, yeah,
That's a
that's fine.
lot to slice
That's
and
fine.
dicing. If the committee won't mind, for item number G, if I could just take out consistent with staff recommendation and just end it at September. Is that all right with you, Councilmember Zhang?
Yes, just make it clear that it goes to the full council in
Yeah.
September before doing anything else.
Right, right. And if that's it, then if we can call the vote.
Yes, Councilmember Tanaka,
No,
Councilmember Stone,
Yes.
Chair Ku,
Yes,
motion carries 2-1.
thank you. And thanks to Mr. Gollinger and Mr. Eggleston for being here tonight, helping us with this. And of course, everybody else. Okay, and now we move into future meetings and agendas, please.
Just very quickly for September, right now on the tentative for us is a race and equity update and a legislative recap, as we should have a good sense of what's at the governor's desk by that time. And also another audit. We'd originally had the protocols and procedures on for next month, but the auditor requested some additional items to come, and there wasn't an update on the procedures and protocols. So I believe those will be the 3 items.
Okay, very good. Thank you. If there's nothing else, we're adjourned. Have a
Right.
good evening and thank you so much.